What is up, Spidey fans? Welcome back to another very entertaining and informative Marvel Spider-Man 2 video. Details and teases for the gameplay of Marvel Spider-Man 2 continue to pile in. And some of the most recent slew of news comes from the one and only PlayStation blog, where the article gives a lot of points and really dives into how Marvel Spider-Man 2 taps into the real power of the PlayStation 5. All these brand new features that were highlighted in this article came from Tim Turi, who's the content communications manager over at PlayStation. He was one of the handful of people who recently had a chance to play several hours of Marvel Spider-Man 2, and he was certainly on the lookout for examples of the PS5's power at work. And the first thing he really wanted to highlight in this article was the haptics and cinematic immersion. And for those of you who are kind of unfamiliar with the use of haptics, haptics are when technology is used to really stimulate the sense of touch and motion. And with PlayStation, haptics have everything to do with the DualSense controllers for the PS5. And Tim really highlights the cutscene between Peter in his brand new black suit facing off against Craven up in the church rafters. He's talking about when Craven hits the bell that sends impactful, reverberating ripples. He says that you can really feel those ripples throughout the DualSense controller's haptics, and that it really sells the disruptive effect on the twitching black suit that we see, and how it's really affecting Peter negatively. And cutscenes like with the lizard during the chase scene is really where we get to see those haptics be put on display, as he says we get a series of very intense pulses as the lizard is a very large creature and he's thumping throughout New York City, so he says we really get to feel pretty much every step that the lizard takes. The next feature that Tim really wanted to delve into was the gameplay with the collider and how it just really impacts the adaptive triggers on the DualSense controller. He's talking about when you're playing as Peter with, of course, the symbiote suit, he's helping out Harry Osborn align a particle collider's beam emitters. And Peter's using his symbiote tendrils to kind of web up those emitters to get them to align so it works properly. And basically, if you don't know or you don't have a PlayStation 5 or never even used a DualSense controller, they introduce all new features with the right and left triggers where, depending on the circumstance that you have to actually use the triggers, like say you're pulling something really heavy like Peter is here with the emitters, the DualSense's triggers are going to offer a certain level of resistance to show just how hard it is to actually do, which is super cool and adds to the overall level of realism, which you guys all know I love when it comes to Spider-Man games. The next feature that Tim really talks about in a lot of detail is the use of the web wings and SSD unlock, which really allow our Spideys to take a rather speedy flight. The use of the web wings are really going to give players a new option to soar over the city, and one of the prime displays of the PS5's power is that it's going to allow Marvel's New York City to load in much faster times than previous titles. I believe one of the developers over at Insomniac, I believe it was Brian Intihar or it could have been James Stevenson, but they definitely talked about using the web wings in Marvel Spider-Man PS4, but they just mentioned that the PS4 didn't really have the power to put these to full use. But now with the advanced technology and power of the PlayStation 5, they finally get the chance to actually introduce these, because the PS5 is actually able to keep up with how fast these web wings actually are, and it can be explained that Marvel's New York just happens to load a lot faster than previous titles, and they don't have to rely on just strictly web slinging, which is pretty cool. And to be honest, this is just the picture perfect time to introduce these web wings, because Insomniac was in fact able to actually roughly double the size of Marvel's New York in this game with the introduction of Queens and Brooklyn, so it definitely makes it a lot more necessary to actually have the web wings be introduced in this game. It makes sense convenience-wise, it makes sense story-wise, and it even makes sense hardware-wise. The next feature that's talked about in the blog is something that I'm really happy about, and that is of course the iconic characters with a lot deeper of emotion. The transition from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5 definitely saw a huge jump in Spider-Man Miles Morales, but now that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is existing solely on the PlayStation 5, it definitely allowed them to take an even bigger leap in terms of the characters' expressions and emotions being put on display that I wasn't expecting. For example, the cutscene between Miles Morales and his mother Rio, it really showcases the concern and love that Rio has for Miles. And sure, you got the facial expressions to show that emotion, but it's all in the eyes. Minute eye movements, the nuanced lighting, visual capillaries, it's all there. And this is really just one of the more simple of scenes. Rio is just a concerned mother worried about the well-being of her son. He's stressed out about college and balancing Spidey work. It clearly displays all of the emotions. Now just imagine if it's like an emotional fight scene or someone gets really hurt or even dies. The character displays and the emotions that they detail in the current scene is just going to be absolutely outstanding, and we haven't even seen anything yet. Moving on, Tim talks about probably my favorite part of this whole article, and that's the quick character swapping between Peter and Miles. Tim says that players have two Spideys at their fingertips in Marvel Spider-Man 2, and swapping between them is a snap. The game zooms far high above bird's eye view, in Marvel's New York City when switching between the two heroes, and quickly zooms back in on the newly selected Spider-Man elsewhere in the city. It's a seamless and muscular demonstration of the PS5's ultra-fast SSD. And we definitely saw a little snip of that in the recent trailer that Brian Intihar gave a demonstration of, where we were currently playing as Miles and then we made the switch to Peter, and then we saw him doing sit-ups on the side of a building, which was just absolutely hilarious and just such a Peter Parker thing for him to be doing. I love that when we're just swinging around, hanging out in New York City, not involved with a particular mission, we'll be able to just switch to whichever Spider-Man that we want to at will, and just no matter what they're doing, whether they're involved in a fight scene just chilling, it doesn't just switch on them doing absolutely nothing. It shows what they're doing, like with Peter doing the sit-ups, and then we just quickly jump in and begin our journey as the newly selected Spider-Man. And the fact that it's just seamlessly able to switch so quickly is just another example of the power of the PlayStation 5. I'm sorry, I gotta mention it at least a couple times. Another brand new feature that Tim talks about is rippling musculature. As speaking about Insomniac upping the realism of the character models, we're getting introduced to simulated musculature, and for those of you who don't know, this is just one of the many subtle detail enhancements that really make the character's movements much more natural to the eye. Just like the movements in facial capture that we were talking about with Rio and Miles, we'll see similar things to that, like arm muscles bulging when they're lifting a heavy object, or we'll be able to see their muscles stretching beneath their superhero suits. Another one of those really subtle but very necessary features that I'm just glad they added, because once again, it adds to that overall level of realism to these games. I'm telling you, video games are becoming more and more like cinema than we even realize, but the difference is we are in control of these games and not cinema, which is absolutely insane. The next feature is something we kind of talked about a little bit already, and that's double the city. Like when we were talking about the web wings and how easy that it's going to be to actually get through the whole map with these web wings. We're of course getting two brand new boroughs of New York City, Queens and Brooklyn, that weren't accessible in the previous two games. And the power of the PS5 certainly has a lot to do with allowing for a lot bigger of a map. Some more insane graphics features that are going to be introduced is spectacular ray tracing. For those of you who played the previous two games on the PlayStation 5, you'll know that they both came with performance mode and fidelity mode, and that performance mode included a much higher frame rate, so it made for a lot more of a fluid gameplay. And fidelity mode in the previous two games featured a lot lower of a frame rate, but they did include ray tracing, which allowed for us to actually see real-time reflections in the game. But now this game and the PlayStation 5 are once again taking things to a whole new level, because both performance and fidelity modes are going to be featuring ray tracing. And this effect is immediately going to be noticed when we're swinging or gliding across water. Tim talks about how he was swinging over the water when he actually got to play, and he actually saw the reflection of the Brooklyn skyline and some splashes of hazy red from one of the large neon signs when he was swinging by. And man, that is just going to be so damn cool. Back when I played the previous two games, I pretty much always used performance mode just because it was a lot more fluid of an experience with the higher frame rate. I didn't really care about the ray tracing features. It was cool to actually see when I actually sat down to pay attention to that, but the performance mode, it was night and day when you compare it to fidelity mode. It was just a lot more fluid of an experience, and I love that mode just way more than fidelity. But now to see that both modes are going to include actually both, performance mode even more all the way. And as we're winding down on this features list, I do want to talk about the bustling city life that Tim talks about. He says that Spider-Man is nothing without a city to protect, and Marvel's New York is livelier than ever. New York pedestrians are represented by a far more diverse array of body types and enter and exit buildings. They drive down the streets in vehicles and display the subtle, authentic bobbing motion of automotive suspension systems. In previous Marvel Spider-Man titles, players could in fact peep into the windows of the buildings for a glimpse at the decor interiors, but Marvel Spider-Man 2 heightens that detail with actual occupants inside. And these small details just help build a rich city backdrop that really feels alive. Now this feature is very interesting because I thought the previous two games really captured the overall level of realism for a New York City, and just when I don't think they could really improve much, they just take it to a whole new level. But now that Tim does mention it here, I do recall some of the cars when they're driving to be a little bit stiff. Pretty much, as he mentioned, they didn't really look like they had much suspension, but now it looks like they will. I'm super glad that we're going to actually see some New Yorkers in the actual buildings, like The attention to detail is off the charts, guys. Another feature that I have heard throughout the grapevine that is mentioned that Tim doesn't really touch upon in this article specifically, and that's when, say, you get into a fight with a group of thugs, and you're like punching them into walls and causing a load of destruction. It actually makes New York City get destroyed, if that makes sense. Similarly to how your suit gets destroyed if you're in a fight, it's going to do that same thing to the actual New York City. So if you're causing a bunch of mayhem, be prepared to see the consequences of that with the actual city getting put into harm's way. And boy, that's just gonna make me smile whenever I see that happens, dang. Now the last feature that Tim talks about is listen up with 3D audio. Tim says that Insomniac's audio team implements an impressive attention to detail, as if we didn't already know this already. He says that 2 sequences really stood out to him in terms of the overall audio and how it's changed from previous games, and he talked about again that sequence in the church between Kraven and Black Suit Spider-Man when the bell tolls during the sequence, when the 2 square off, and when the bell actually hits, it delivers like a very convincing punch, as if we literally are Peter Parker in the actual scene. The effects of when the bell actually rings feels like we are actually being controlled by the symbiote, and we actually feel the pain that Peter's going through. Another instance that he talks about is when we're crawling after the lizard in one of New York's sewers. The claustrophobic sequence is heightened by a 360-degree range of sounds, including creaky pipes, crumbling rubble, and the occasional skittering of the lizard himself. Now, I already have the PlayStation 5 Pulse 3D headset, and I cannot wait to see what this thing can do with this game. But guys, that's going to do it for this extensive breakdown of a bunch of the new features that are going to be involved with the power of the PlayStation 5 for Marvel Spider-Man 2. Be sure to let me know down below in the comments section what's your favorite feature that was mentioned in this article that gets you the most hyped for this game. Be sure to leave a like on this video if you learned something new here today. I certainly did. Make sure that you're a subscriber to my channel if you love Marvel Spider-Man 2 and you want to stay up to date for all that's to come. Thank you all so much for watching. See ya, chumps.
See ya, chump.